no, I'm past that too. It's much more, you know, what's really going on, and then following that. And oftentimes that is, the act of confessing it can feel redemptive, but what you're confessing to is, you know, dark oftentimes, and full of mixed up, confused, self-destructive and other destructive feeling. And if you're not getting into some of that stuff, then you're bullshitting, frankly, or you're not telling the whole truth. And so, but I would say certainly the really shitty, awful poems in bad poetry are an effort to say, here is some completely self-absorbed, non-redemptive work that I just pooped onto the page and thought it was wonderful. And then, you know, to sort of take apart why I did that, because I think that's also a part of writing. Everybody's very focused on the very slender portion of your work that is successful, redemptive, everybody gets it, everybody praises you, but that sits atop a pile of shit. It's the little daisy that grows. That people go, oh, look at that lovely daisy. And you say, no, there's more.
That's a tough question. I would say maybe I wrote a story about the California drought this past fall. And my assignment I was given was to go down into the Central Valley and talk to the farmers. They read my book and thought I'd have a shorthand with farmers, which I did, because I grew up around people who were farmers. And the valley is very conservative, and I'm not. And as I started collecting up the story, I knew that I had to capture the truth of these people, and that's my job, and I felt tremendous sympathy for their situation, and I knew I had to say certain things that would maybe not sit well with my very liberal environmentalist friends. And I had to take a stance that was kind of situated in a way that I thought was clear-eyed, but it was risky, and it would make me a target. And even within the article, I tried to make a plea that saying that it bothers me that everything in our world has become politicized to the extent where we cannot offer sympathy to people who are suffering because they are of a different political persuasion. And that in and of itself, though I thought was something I had to say, I was very worried about it. It felt very risky to me. To say it differently, if I would have just gone down there and slammed them and said that these are farmers and they're wasting water and they're a bunch of conservative conspiracy theorists and all that, and that would have been disingenuous too, frankly. I did get some of that, but mainly they were very fine people. But I could have done that and returned back to the community where I live, in my group of friends where I exist, and I would not have had to explain myself as much. And I would have been a hero. And so I took that stance, and it felt like something that I had to do. And the article went out to the world and was very well received by both sides, and I felt it enabled a conversation. Maybe not morally redemptive conversation, but a conversation that finally let people be able to say the things they had to say and move on to some solutions. So.
What's the title of your
It's titled, what is it?
Just Google Alan Heathcock Medium. And
It's in the medium.com.
I think it's like 0% Water, maybe is the title. I can't remember the exact title. I'm very thirsty.
Medium.com.
Medium.
And
Yeah.
it's just look for his piece.
Just title Alan Heathcock Drought.
I thought it was like Dust Bowl, Drought.
Yeah, the New American Dust Bowl.
The New American.
That's the name. The New American Dust Bowl.
How do I? Yeah. It's a great piece. Well, we talked by the fire about this a little last night, and you know, I think that I'm a little confused exactly by what you mean as redemptive. You know, I agree with Steve, and I think we all definitely feel like we don't ever sit down and say, let me tell you the message, you know, let's give you the redemption, you know. But I think that the work that I've written that is doing what you know, what you're hoping for, looking for, none of it has been published. And it's because it ended up being really emotionally flat. The piece that came to mind from where, you know that book, I'm forgetting the title, it's like Harry Selby Jr.
Last Exit to Brooklyn.
Last Exit to Brooklyn. Have any of you read that book?
Yeah.
I read that book and was so devastated by it, and I wanted to emulate like what he was doing. It's just a really dark, sad, tragic, brutal, deeply honest. I mean, honest, I think, in the way that you're looking for, where there's just like no redemption, and it's the sort of darkest side of who we are, and basically nothing else. You know, you get in graphic detail the gang rape of this young woman, you get descriptions of people eating shit, and you know, all kinds of horrible things. And I was interested in this because I wanted to learn how to be that ruthless on the page. And so I wrote a story about a time that my dad hit my sister with a wrench when she was like in first grade. And it was so horrible. And I took it into my, you know, graduate school workshop, and everyone was like, this is just icky. I don't want to read this. And it was because I was just describing a horrible thing. And the way that basically the whole meaning of the story was writing on the horribleness of a man hitting a girl with a wrench. And there was nothing that I had to offer except ugliness. And so I just decided not to offer it. It wasn't an interesting way for me to be bold. And that doesn't mean that I don't think that dark stories should be told, or that they should be neatly wrapped up and everyone's redeemed. I think that, to me, actually a sort of searchiness or ambivalence is a more profound kind of redemption. And so, you know, I think that that's where I get stuck doing that thing that, you know, when we were talking about the fire, that you're hoping that you like, that you maybe want people to do, or that you want to do in your own work. But I will say it was an interesting place for me on my journey as a writer to write that kind of stuff and then see what effect it had on both me and the readers. And it just ended up being a good end for me, though it was a good exercise in something that has contributed to my work.
I only heard about the fire conversation secondhand in another conversation near the fire. And the one thing that I heard you say, you may not have even said it because again we're now in whisper down the alley territory, but the one thing that was reported to me that you were saying last night is that that you need to be careful to try too hard to make friends with your reader. And I heard that. I mean, that's something that I really heard, because that's something I tend to watch myself about, because it's easy for me to make friends with my reader. And that's something that I wouldn't say that I try not to, or I try to, but it's just I'm aware of it. Like, don't get too friendly. Don't want to be liked by too many people. You know, I think that's really good writer advice. But the first thought I had when you asked the question just now was I wrote an essay called Executrix. I was the executrix of my father's will, and that was a word I didn't know before it happened to me, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I couldn't believe how much it sounded like dominatrix for executives. Like, I couldn't believe it. When I found out that was the word, I couldn't believe that was the word, and given my father's life and his sexual proclivities, it was too unbelievable to me that I was now called that. I wanted it. Remember in the 70s, like the spangly T-shirts that said like Jackson Brown, like the black, and then the letters were in like vinyl spangly. Like, I wanted a spangly executive T-shirt. Anyway, long story short, that essay was it was difficult to write. It was difficult to have in the world, because what I had to admit was that when I got the call, I was in Indiana at school there, DePauw University, doing a gig, and I got the call that my father was dead, and I had no idea how I was supposed to feel. Like, I wasn't in the room. The line I wrote is like I was waiting for an emotion, like a pitcher waits for a knuckleball. You know, had no idea. Like, and so to write that essay, like write about that absence of feeling, and not be able by the end of the essay to get to any feeling, to get to anything redemptive, to not work through it to some place of either saying, you know, I hated him and that's okay, or I should have tried harder at the end, or perhaps, you know, in the next life we'll do better. Like, there was no getting to any of that. So it really was an essay that just had to stay in this kind of wonder at my lack of response, basically.
The first thing that I thought of when you asked that is well, if you believe my Amazon reviews, my first novel, Failing Paris, is exactly that book. But no, seriously, people, you know, it is a young woman, I won't give it away, but it's 1 week in Paris. She's not redeemed. What happens, she realizes that, you know, Prince Charming is never coming, and we exist in a complete failure of language. I wrote that, essentially I wrote most of that when I was 28, and I would write a very different book now, but that is a book that seems to really, really anger people and piss them off because it is, but I do believe it's somewhat of an immature book. How could it not be? You know? But yeah, if you're looking for doom, gloom, and no redemption, that's what I can suggest.